Hey guys, welcome to Punky's World. This is going to be part 2 of the man-child chicken mill fire because it cut off very abruptly. And totally missed out on a bunch of stuff. Here we go. It cut off right where I was talking about them knocking the walls down. So let's continue, shall we? And he said, during the night, we watched floor after floor collapse, as I mentioned, and the construction crane came in from Webster the next afternoon, which was a Thursday. Interestingly, 75 years of mill oil and lubricants, topped with 25 years of chicken manure, sawdust, and feathers on top of huge hardwood beams and sturdy planks to fuel such a raging fire. They angled the nozzle so that it sprayed in through an open window, so it like sat on the windowsill. One of the older firefighters said that's how you gain an extra man. You use the windowsill. It's pretty smart. He actually climbed up on the fire truck with another fireman, and they could see the crane when it struck the huge clock tower. And he said, the wrecking ball swung, and 100 years of granite history toppled to the ground. He fell asleep on top of the fire truck. And then the rats came. If they'd been living in the basement of the mill, they somehow escaped the fire to come back. If they'd been living in the woods, they smelled the stench of 80,000 dead and barbecued chicken carcasses and thought they'd arrived at rat heaven. The first time I read that, barbecued chicken, I laughed so hard. But actually, they did live in and around the mill, because my mother talked about the rats. And that's where that story that I told you in the previous video about, well, my friend Randy that just passed away, his mother, Matilda, known as Tilly, caught one of these rats. These were giant, well-fed rats. And they're actually called river rats because they hang around the river, which is where they come from. And they do tend to be large. Anyway. So she took a shoebox, caught one of these rats, put it in the shoebox, presumably dead. She presumably scooped it up dead into the shoebox. Brought it to a town meeting, plopped the box on the table, said, what are you going to do about this? You say we don't have rats? My mother said that was Tilly. That was her makeup. That was who she was. I wish I could have known her. You know, she just sounds like somebody I would have liked. I think I got to tell Randy that story, and he laughed. He says, sounds like my mom. They actually did reuse some of the granite, but he's not sure where. Again, this article was written by Stephen LeClaire of Stephen Benjamin Insurance on the Old Sam Sutton blog. The debris inside the charred granite walls crawled with a life of its own as the vermin danced over the warm ashes, feasting on the dead. Ew! And the kids in Manchild were given the day off from school because you have to remember, their school, remember where I showed you the beautiful new building being built? Well, that was the Manchild, had been the Manchild school. Then it became the American Legion post, and now it's the new building, which I guess is going to be housing from what I understand. It's literally right across the street. Because where the fire barn is, which I showed you when I hurt myself, is where the chicken mill was. So yeah, it was right across the street. And they had to clean up ash from everywhere. They literally had to clean out the Mumford River and catch a few chickens that survived, that were running around Manchog. And I also had read to you a comment made by my cousin, Denise Hemingway Predmore. She said, I remember it so well. I grew up on the end of 2nd Street, right on Stevens Pond. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street are on the same side as the school, I believe. So again, right across the street. I will tell you our own personal experience after I read you this, which got cut off, which ticks me off. But anyway, I grew up on the end of 2nd Street, right on Stevens Pond. I read your entire posting. The only comment that I have to differ with you was the smell, she writes in quotes. Growing up there, I don't remember but a few days that I could smell the mill. Maybe because we were by the water and usually had a breeze from the east that may have stopped the odor. I do remember when we started taking the bus, driven by Bunk King. Mr. King, I don't know if it's the same Mr. King, but he was a fixture in town. The family was a fixture in town. If it rained, we would wait in the doorway of the mill until the bus came. I remember the Zeitemers. I love how she spelled it. She spelled it phonetically. That's something I would do because it's a very difficult name to spell. As I mentioned in the first video, my cousin is a Zeitemer. Also her cousin. I'm not sure if I still have the bill of sale on the house I grew up in, but at the time they were selling the homes in the village. Our house was bought for $1,000. That home is still in my family. It's true. Her brother and sister-in-law owned it and lived in it. He passed away, and at the time that he passed away, they had sold it to their youngest daughter, their middle child, and she and her husband were fixing it up, and I guess mom was living on one side, and they were going to be living on the other side. So, I did know of a few mothers in town that worked the candle line at the chicken farm. To me, Manchog was the best place to grow up. I'm now 69 years old, but I will always remember Manchog with a smile on my face and a very large part of my heart. I now live in Texas. My name is Denise Hemingway Predmore. I love you, Denise. Now, for my own story about this fire and how it relates to me and my genealogy. This fire and some exploding transformers are the reason that I am absolutely terrified of fire to this day. I had nightmares about fire as a kid. Absolutely horrible. It was so bad that they almost had to take us out by boat. My mother recalled. But they were able to get us all out. The people who lived on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street. Because we were evacuated. The article says the power was turned out, which makes sense. Blog post also says, it describes all the ash. It almost sounds like a volcanic eruption, when you think about it. My father didn't really talk about it. My mother, however, did talk about it. She told me that night, because it was 6:45 in the evening, I think. I think that's what it said. And she said, we saw a glow outside. What light is that? Because we were almost across the street because of where our house sat. And so my mother looked out the window. She said, it was on fire. She said, and I said, Willie, the chicken mill's on fire. And I think they were one of the ones that called the fire department, and all of the men in the neighborhood, my mother said they had bucket brigades going, they had garden hoses going, whatever that they could get their hands on until, actual fire equipment got there. She said the men of that village that night saved that village. She took so much pride in the men of that village and what they did to save that village with their bucket brigades and garden hoses and whatever they had to save the homes. Many years later, when we were living back in Manchog, there was another fire. This time it was the house we were living in then. Burnt to the ground. It's the house I was born in. Well, came home from the hospital in, but you know what I mean. And I remember both of my parents crying. This is where they started their life together. And my dad was so emotional. I said, I'm so sorry, Daddy. He said, it's okay, honey. He said, you have to remember, I lived there from about the age of 15 until after you were born, which is true. So he would have been there for at least 15 years, from the age of 15 to the age of, well, probably almost 32, because I was almost 2 when we moved from there. Maybe a year and a half. So yeah, so we're talking 17 years of his life spent there. Virtually all of his teens, all of his 20s, He met his wife and got married there. Well, technically a second, married there, and living there, attached to it, and to see it just go bye-bye like that was hard. And we lived right there, so I don't know what caused that fire. My mother speculated that the chicken farm fire might have started from a discarded cigarette or something along those lines. And there were people who actually lived there. There was living, what is going on? Oh, 30% power. Living quarters there. But anyway, no people were killed. Most of the chickens were. I just can't imagine seeing roasted chickens flying for their lives and then just thud on the ground. And the few that were running around that were still alive that had no feathers, and horrible. And keep in mind, this man that wrote this was 16 at the time. Thank you for joining me for part 2. I'm glad I was able to do a part 2. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you next time. Please subscribe. and hit that bell. It's all free. God bless you. Bye-bye.